Tonight, a return visit with, without doubt, one of the most enigmatic, talented, gifted, and unique people we have ever had the pleasure to have on this program in the nearly 6 years I've been doing it now. He is Ingo Swann, and just about a month ago, Ingo visited for a couple of hours here, and what was so provocative and unique, I asked him if he'd come back and do it again, and he said yes, so he's back tonight. For those of you who may not know much about Ingo Swann, I'm going to tell you so you'll have an idea. His new book, entitled Penetration, The Question of Extraterrestrial and Human Telepathy, Extraterrestrials, Telepathy, Earthside and Space-side Visits to the Moon, ultra-super-secret UFO activities and cover-ups, just some of the things touched upon and revealed in the book by Ingo. Science itself felt a small ripple when, in 1973, parapsychologist Dr. Gertrude Schmeidler reported the extraordinary success, the first of its kind ever, of a mind-over-matter experiment. Ingo Swann, using only his mind repeatedly, had been able to cause controlled temperature changes in a sealed, distant vacuum. It could now be seen that the human mind was capable of extending its powers beyond the confines of the brain. After 1974, Swann's participation in research became more vigorous. He became an intensively studied, as he calls it, guinea pig at the famous, legendary think tank, Stanford Research Institute, and he worked with dozens of other researchers in the U.S. and Europe at that time. Reader's Digest, 1977, said that recent research confirmed that Ingo Swann, in remote viewing experiments, could go to any spot on the globe and sketch correctly roads and buildings just as they are at that point. And now, with all of that said, let us welcome our friend back live from New York and his flat, Mr. Ingo Swann. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be back. I'm still around.
Well, and I am, for one, and many listening in agree that that's a grand development.
I've had a few students in the past, and when they find out that their systems of perception don't stop with their 5 physical senses, but you can access things from distances and things like that, this changes their life at some very fundamental level, you know. The people that know a great deal about this are American Indians. They have a rich heritage in this kind of thing, and it's part of their culture, and it's sort of accepted. But for us Americans, I had certain kinds of natural abilities, but when I found out they could be sort of brought under conscious control, this was a great revelation to me, and it really altered my view of, shall we say cosmic reality, or the bigger picture of what a human being consists of.
What did you do from 1980 to tonight, Ingo? Actually, we're on a few weeks ago. What were you doing all those years besides your artwork?
In the about 1977, all the work I was doing got classified, so I couldn't talk about it, and really still can't. And when I retired from all that in 1989, I just sat back to write books and sort of do the things I wanted to do. And although I eventually published 6 books, I have about 7 that nobody would publish. So I'm sort of working on those to get them sort of in print at least.
There is talk on the net about the moon being an artificial satellite, to the extent that it wasn't originally here. It was sort of transported or brought here, if you want to think towed here, whatever. There is talk about the moon being not solid. There is talk about mining operations on the moon. There is talk about why our Apollo astronauts ended their missions and there was no follow-through, when all that talk in the late 50s and 60s was about getting to the moon to colonize it, to mine it, and develop it. Let's start with a general overview of the moon, Ingo, and what about the moon got you intrigued with remote viewing it in the first place? How did that happen?
Well, I was asked by some very mysterious people to do some remote viewing sessions about the moon. And they volunteered to pay me money, actually. Most of the work I ever got involved in hardly paid anything, you know. So I said, sure, I'd do it. And then in this remote viewing sessions, well, you know, viewed some things on the moon that I thought were really outrageously strange, like people there and big structures and lots of activity and things like that. And
this would have been after the Apollo missions or during?
Yes, it was I think it started in 75 and went into 1976, and was asked to have a 10-year confidentiality thing about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole series of events that took place because of this sort of innocent remote viewing of the moon really were, to me, quite shocking, and I was glad to forget about the whole thing until in about 1990 and 91, I realized I was starting to forget certain aspects of it, so I wrote it all down. And that led in my literary agent then said, oh, this is going to make a great book. And when she tried to sell it, nobody would pick it up and publish it. Because it contains several concepts that are very embarrassing, I think, to, the mainstream powers that be.
Give us an idea of an embarrassing concept.
Well, we've been taught many years that the moon was a dead place. There was no water, no air, no nothing, I saw air there at least. I don't think I commented on water on the moon, but it's only in the last 2 years that the science has finally admitted that there is water and an atmosphere on the moon. But back in the 60s, this was denied. Everybody was taught to believe that it was a dead, airless a satellite of Earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then even some of the NASA scientific missions there sort of discovered a number of things, like analysis of moon rock suggests that they're about at least a half a billion years older than Earth is itself. So there is, if that would be true, and they think that that is true, then there's a question where the moon came from, and it would not be a natural satellite of Earth. And then the density of the moon is far less than would be expected if it was a solid satellite. So that means that it's probably got a lot of hollow cavities in it. And even Carl Sagan printed a statement way back when that a natural satellite cannot be hollow. And if the satellite's hollow, that means it's not natural. And no real scientist said it's a created or man-made type of thing, but that's the direct implication there. And if you don't know much about the moon and you don't know much about ETs and things like that, then none of this makes any sense. But if you know more and more and more about it, then a whole bigger picture begins to unfold. You really can't avoid it anymore. There is an issue of why the Soviet Union and the United States did not go back to the moon in the 70s when they spent all this money getting there to colonize it.
They sort of abruptly stopped, and that has been one issue that has not been questioned by the general public very much. And
well, I mean, the general public doesn't really know enough. Everybody was diverted to space platforms and things like that.
Yeah.
But the moon didn't. We didn't go back to the moon. And then there's the matter of the complete lack of high-resolution photography about the moon. I mean, this should be, as we mentioned before, if you've seen the movie, it's still in circulation right now, called Enemy of the State. You find out what high-resolution photography is from satellites that are between 400 to 1,000 miles up in the sky, right? They can read gum wrappers in the gutter here in New York. And there's no photographic evidence of the moon along these lines at all. You can't find it anywhere. And that's completely outrageous, because even in the 70s and 60s, they had really good
even in the 70s and 60s.
Right.
That's another one of those glaring issues that people just don't seem to take by the horns and address. The Clementine mission, By the way, all of this is addressed in Ingo's book in fascinating detail with an incredible storyline carrying it right along. Penetration is the name of the book. Clementine, set up by the U.S. Navy, apparently.
Army.
Excuse me, the Army?
Army, yeah.
That came across as a Navy project for some reason in the beginning. But
Well, it's an Army project.
Nonetheless.
It's not even a NASA project.
No.
Army project.
The militarization of space continues, folks. It went up there and apparently photographed the entire moon with great detail, or much of it.
Most of it, anyway. And it was loaded with different kinds of cameras, you know. Then we came back, and I read in the New York Times where they were promising its high-resolution photographs of the moon, but none have ever been released to this date. None.
We have a similar situation, a parallel situation with the Mars Global Surveyor and other Mars probes, which have apparently had the ability to take some pretty high-res, snazzy photos, and we haven't seen many of them. We've seen kind of blurry things here and there. What's your feeling about that?
There can only be one reason to withhold high-resolution photographs of the moon and of Mars, because they reveal things that would probably cause us to have to re-identify our position in the universe, if you get what I mean.
There's another one of those statements, folks. Yes, causes us to re-identify our position in the universe. In other words, quite clearly, if high-res pictures were made freely available of the moon and of Mars at random items would pop up that would create some real public relations difficulties, shall we say.
Well, it could create some philosophical ones, too.
Could indeed, and could create great bonanzas and new awareness and all the rest.
I'm not the first to imply that we're not alone in the universe. There was a great book written, I mention it in my book, by Walter Sullivan in 1964, and he based his observations on telescopic information and NASA photographs, you know, NASA information. And he wrote a book saying we're not alone. And then, of course, in the 70s, George Leonard wrote a book entitled "We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon." So, you know, I'm just a recent person along these lines here of trying to make these points here. I just did it from another viewpoint, which makes it a more intimate type of thing regarding us humans, and T's, and the connecting line, of course, is telepathic interaction with them.
Were those early books impetus for Mr. Axelrod and friends to get you to do some remote viewing of the moon? Something like that?
No, I don't know, because Mr. Axelrod was a very careful, regarded person, and he didn't tell me anything he didn't really have to. You know? But I think that, scientists and government people have known that the moon is not what we're taught, and
you feel the Apollo astronauts are well aware of that, don't you?
Well, I don't want to outthink Apollo astronauts, you know. I mean, they do have difficulties about secrecy oaths and things like that, but good heavens, you know, I mean, in my book, I present not a whole lot of evidence, but the evidence I put there means that, there's just certain things that have to be the truth about the moon. And one of them is that there's activity going on there, and it's not just natural activity, it's consciously, intellectually controlled activity. And that's just, I mean, the evidence along these lines is mountainous.
It's now in this era of burgeoning UFO glasnost. He tells the story of meetings held at a secret underground facility not far from Washington, D.C., and of being taken to a remote location near the Arctic Circle to witness the expected arrival of a huge UFO over the surface of an Alaskan lake. And boy, when you read it, we read a little bit of that last time, and it's gripping, to say the least. This book discusses undeveloped human telepathy and contrasts it with the probable existence of fully developed alien telepathy, which may have many different forms. Ingo also explores the fact that we officially know far more than we're admitting about the moon, its origins, its atmosphere, its occupants, and many other unusual features. Penetration is about 1 of the means by which we can learn more about those not of this earth, and vice versa. Okay, Mr. Swann, you talked about some things more than provocative at the end of that last hour. People on the moon, the end of the Apollo program. People on the moon. What kind of people?
My estimation is no. I think that, well, I mean, I have to go on the data that I can gather up and put together, and to me this means that it's not us Earthsiders who've done this, but ETs, and there's no reason why ETs shouldn't be humanoid like ourselves. After all, these are very wonderful biological body forms and everything like that. In fact, but you know, I'm not the first to see humanoids.
The other issue about the moon is we have historical record going back decades of people seeing lights on the moon.
Yes.
Objects, large objects moving across the illuminated surface, or what appears to be that.
Yes.
So they moving across the lighted surface area of the moon.
Yeah.
And all of these things together would certainly paint a much different picture of the moon that we are commonly fed. What's going on up there, Ingo? Is it perhaps, did you have a sense of geological work, mining, development, staging?
Well, I myself didn't have that particularly in what I call my experience of the moon, but others have said that one of the reasons why there would be any interest in the moon is because maybe it's some kind of a space base to begin with, and that there's a lot of geological activity which seems to be going on, which Earthsiders interpret as mining or something like that. I don't have any answers for that, any real answers, and Fred Steckling in his wonderful book, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon, I mean, he does a really great job, and I think he's now passed away. His book was published in 1981, but I think his son is bringing out an updated version of that book.
Well, that'll be good.
Heard about it this Sunday here, and you know, it's very difficult to read that book, which is put together so well, with multitudes of actual NASA photographs, and he's just pointing out what can be seen in the photographs if you care to look that deeply at them.
And we go back once again to the comment you made about high-resolution photographs.
High-resolution.
There just aren't any around there, folks.
Nope.
And believe me, they exist, but we can't see them.
The question back in, I guess it was the third or fourth grade science class, I was given an explanation as to why, coincidentally or by chance, the rotation of the moon corresponds with its orbit so that we don't see the back side of it. Years later, I began to question that, thinking, what are the odds that we don't, that it doesn't turn?
That there's a perfect sync, yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, what is your input on? Is it naturally possible, maybe in the difference of internal density of the moon, that we only see one side, or do you think the orbit and the synchronization is controlled due to different things that might naturally affect that, such as sun cycles, elliptical orbit, position in relation to the sun and other planets, different gravity forces that would misalign the surface of the moon that we see? How could we always see the same side?
Well, my response to that question is dependent upon the scientific sources that I'm familiar with. And there are a number of theories why the moon doesn't behave like just a natural satellite would. And I don't think, and there may be a final answer to this question that you've posed, but I don't think there is one. I don't think anybody knows exactly why that happens, why the moon keeps one side always to Earth. And so, based upon the science papers, that's one of the phenomena of the moon that I've made an effort to find out what the answer was, and it seems like there isn't an answer yet. So I don't have one either.
Okay.
It shouldn't be. I mean, I think there's general agreement that it should revolve on its own axis and present us with all sides, but it doesn't do that, and nobody knows why.
Okay. All right.
My whole field is always, if I would put my whole interest in a nutshell, it's been the fascination with invisible, intangible forces or influences that have tangible, visible effects. And a great number of things fall into that category, and one of them was psychic perception, psychic phenomena, which really don't have a basis in physicality, but do produce physical effects, results.
The issue of ET, telepathy, control influencing us individually, in groups, en masse, is a very important one. How do we approach that with an understanding that many of the people out there don't believe in ETs necessarily? How would we lay this on the table for them to get a good grasp?
Well, I don't deal with belief or disbelief. I just have devoted a lot of attention to things that interested me, and these things interested me. And you know, we have freedom in this country to pursue our interests and to form opinions and things like that. And if these areas don't interest other people, that's fine with me. I mean, you know, we can't all be exactly alike. But if you get into the area of, let's say hypothetically, we accept hypothetically that ETs exist,
mm-hmm.
and that they come and they communicate with people or abduct people and things like that. That these people say, well, most of the communication was done by telepathy. This is very widespread, you know, that people say this, and of course if the ETs wouldn't have to deal with the 33,000 active languages on planet Earth, if they could just talk telepathy to everybody, which is a series of images and sign recognitions and things like that, that would be what telepathy consists of. And that's a real possibility.
Yes.
An absolutely real possibility. And we know in our species that we have spontaneous examples of telepathy occurring all the time, principally between mothers and children, sometimes father and children, and between lovers and man and wife, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know it's there, that there's an undercurrent of telepathic.
Right. From chapter 24 of Ingo's book, Penetration, the Earthside concept of telepathy. Let me read just a little bit here. In the previous chapter, I pointed out that the modern concept of telepathy has not produced much in the way of evidence for telepathy, much above some very low threshold activity. In other words, human telepathic faculties are known to exist, but with the exception of spontaneous examples of telepathy, it does not function in a high-stage way. And there could be any number of reasons for this. What are some of the reasons, Ingo?
The model is wrong. We have a model since about 1911 that telepathy acts like radio broadcasting, where a sender broadcasts out to a receiver who picks it up. So we have the sender and the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And the broadcasting goes across space, and there has to be a carrier wave of some kind to get the information from the sender to the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
But this model, which has been used rigorously from about 1911, at least through the 50s, never produced much in the way of an enhancement of telepathic contact. And one of the reasons might be is if you ask people that are good at telepathy what they experience while they're doing it, they say that they experience being at one with each other, or being in the same time-space framework with each other. They're sharing, they're identical, they're together.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of thing is the quantum mechanics things, where two identical events can occur separately, as if distance between them doesn't really matter. So what's dropped out in the experiential thing is the concept of distance and broadcasting through the distance. So that would appear to be the more correct model than the radio broadcast model. And
I
if
see.
you have a wrong model or a wrong theory in science and it doesn't produce results, they usually throw it out and look around for another one that produces better results.
Usually.
But in with regard to telepathy, nobody's thrown out the old model. They still conduct experiments based upon the old model, even though it doesn't work too well.
Huh.
My question is, when you remote view, do you have an altered state going where you're beside your consciousness, where you've got a duplicity of your consciousness working?
Okay.
No, the idea that you have to have an altered state to do any of these things was abandoned in our research because the viewer has to stay completely conscious in order to create a record and stay within their abilities and what they're doing. Actually, it's an intellectual discipline that is very rigorous, but it permits this kind of information to be accessed and brought down through consciousness and put on a piece of paper. And if an altered state occurs to the degree that it distorts the production of the information, then the person has to take a break and recover from it and go on. It's in a sort of a way, your latitude for altered states is about the degree that you could experience in driving a car. You can only permit a certain amount of altered state before you're going to wreck the car, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's between being acutely conscious and riding a bike.
Okay, we have just about 20 minutes left, Ingo. What would you like to cover in our last couple of segments here?
Well, how about how to become a second-class citizen in no time?
Okay, and the next time you come back on the program, we'll talk about first-class citizen. We have to start somewhere.
If you experience something that you can't prove happens, you become a second-class citizen right away.
That's true.
That's one way to become a second-class citizen. So,
yes.
all these people that experience things they can't prove happen or can't explain, they suddenly find themselves sort of in a second-class citizen position. And this includes the whole of parapsychology in terms of the rest of the conventional world, And people who've been seen UFOs, they fall into that category. And it's just really, if you look at it from that viewpoint, people are reluctant to talk about what they can't explain or prove because it makes them a second-class citizen right away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Possible, but it's within my acceptance reality that they did go to the moon and things like that. It's also quite well known that they stopped going to the moon and they left 3 Apollo setups rotting away on the launch pads down there. They just abandoned them. There were supposed to be 21 Apollo flights, I think, or something like that. And they just forgot the last 3, which is a terrible waste of money. And if boondoggling America just keeps funding coming, they wouldn't have stopped having an interest in going to the moon. But, there's a lot of chicanery everywhere, and it's very hard to wheedle one's way through it all.
Well, that's true, but the thing that I think I've always had a question on is if they were able to make so many flights to the moon. I'm not sure what the number was that they accomplished, but if they actually did accomplish that many flights, it seems like that with progressive flights that they would, maybe be able to find more economical ways of doing it and be able to cut down maybe some of the expenses and make it more, and make it to where they could improve on it, to where they could get better at going to the moon. And it seems like your
space shuttle and the space platform has been even more expensive than the Apollo flights were.
Oh yeah, much more. But it just seems to me that, like with the progression of the development of the automobile and stuff, they just kept developing it, making it better and, more efficient and things like that. But yet it seems like with the moon flight, like you say, they got to a certain point and then it just kind of got cut off.
Well, we are of a mind, Brad, that we may have been told to sort of cut it off.
You have to incorporate. See, we like everything to be logical. We like it to go from A to Z and without any interruption. But the more you know about everything involved with space and the moon and Mars and things like that, the more you encounter some very illogical things that just don't fit in anywhere. And it's up to grabs to explain these illogical things, and that's up to the individual, I think. There's no one answer to everything here.
Time, Ingo, talking about these new and their wondrous discoveries, extrasolar planets. I think there are about 18 of them now, something like that, and more coming all the time. And yet right off our own back door, we've got this moon sitting out there.
Well, the one that's avoided, you mean?
Yep.
The moon that's avoided.
That empty piece of rock up there.
Empty piece of rock that nobody pays any attention to. Why do you think that is? I mean, gosh.
Yeah, it's amazing.
See that we're being mind controlled by the ETs to forget about the moon?
Yeah. Here's an interesting little tidbit from the book, and we've touched upon some of these tonight. On October 12, 1954, about 6 years before President Kennedy announced the great American effort to place a man on the moon, one astronomer was utilizing the telescope at the Edinburgh University to examine that moon. He was able to observe, quoting now, a dark sphere travel in a straight line from the crater Tycho to the crater Aristarchus.
Yes.
As I mentioned earlier, with all of those amazing colors and glows and things from that crater. This is a wild place up there. And at the beginning of this chapter, 19, which is entitled Moon-Style Occupational Hazards, you mentioned, of course, Fred Steckling and Dan Ross's books. It is a wonderful bibliography and penetration as well. Their estimates, talking about Steckling and Ross, more or less conclude that dwelling on the moon would resemble dwelling in the higher Andes or the Himalayan mountains.
That's right.
But that healthy and vibrant Earthsiders would acclimate quite well to such conditions.
Yeah, especially those with big lungs that are born at... If you're born at a high altitude, then you develop big lungs, and you'd be an ideal candidate for occupying the moon. It's in that kind of environment.
Just fascinating. I want to mention again that moon site for all of you to go and take a look at when you can. If I can get back to it here in my bookmarks, let's see. It's an official NASA report available at www.mufor.org/TLP/lunar.html. Go check that out and read through it. And as you read Ingo's book, refer back to these 500-plus sightings. And let's do hope that Fred Steckling's son revises and updates that book. I think that would be a very valuable thing.
It's available. Somebody's going to send me one.
Are you under a lifetime stricture on some of this material, or is there a fuse on it?
It's classified that I have knowledge about. It becomes declassified, then I could talk about it. Right.
So there's a safe...
So that kind of thing.
A very safe position to take. I like that.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of a patriot, you know.
It's true. You know, people don't know this.
I signed security oaths, and I don't see any reason to disavow my own agreement to those oaths. You know.
You worked for the United Nations for quite a long time. That's an interesting... How many?
12 years.
Were you an idealist at the time? How did you view that UN service?
Oh, it was terrific. It was a wonderful experience, and in those years the UN was still largely effective. It wasn't the big bureaucratic snafu that it's become lately, and I think it still is effective, you know. You know, the World Forum, you know, the world has to go to a place to talk about their problems, or there's going to be increasing conflicts and things like that. And although the UN hasn't completely done away with those, I think it's eliminated a lot of conflicts that might have taken place had they not been able to go to the North Lounge at the United Nations and have a few drinks and talk it out. So, no, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I loved working there.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, we've got a couple of internet questions that I've missed, and let me see if I can work some of those in for our good listeners who can't call in. Hi, Jeff. I find the distance of the moon from the Earth and or from the sun interesting, because if it was not so perfect, there would be no total eclipse.
That's right.
Also, does that intrigue you, Ingo?
Well, it's beyond my realm of expertise. You really need to be an astrophysicist to deal with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But all I can do is read the papers that the astrophysicists produced, and the moon is a mystery. If it comes down to the bottom line, it's a complete mystery. It really is.
I'm wondering, also says Mike, if in some way this is connected to how our consciousness is eclipsed 1/10, so they say, by our waking consciousness. We have, 1/10 of our mind or something we're able to get to. I assume that's what he's alluding to.
Well, there's been various estimates in the past about how much of our brain power we actually utilize.
What's your guess?
When I was studying biology in school, it was 9%. A genius might activate 20%, but that still leaves 80% unactivated, even at a genius level.
I think we might have been engineered with a firewall built in there genetically at some point, somehow, to shut that off from us.
Absolutely. There's no question in my mind that we're bioengineered.
There's no logical reason for that to be withheld from us at 80% or 90%.
No, not really. I think psychics probably can go up to 25%.
Mm-hmm.
They are using elements. A psychic still has to use perceptual qualities of the brain-mind neural system, and if anybody who can enhance their perception to engage these things is working maybe 20 to 25%.
Fascinating.
It's a rough estimate.
I understand. Velikovsky, worlds in collision and all the rest, interplanetary orbital mechanics, dynamics, collisions, and catastrophic scenarios. Intriguing to you?
Oh, yes. I have all his books here. And the one that most people don't read is the book entitled The Vindication of Velikovsky, which was published in the 70s, which shows how many of his theories and ideas have since proved to be true, that he was crucified for at the time he made them. So that's an interesting book, yes.
Yeah, he was just destroyed, basically, by many of his alleged colleagues and so forth. We are just about out of time, and live from New York, Mr. Ingo Swann, staying up late for all of you tonight to share his remarkable life and his remarkable mind. He is something else.